Great to be here, and it's been fun actually collaborating with Derek. We've been speaking since the spring about things, and it was great when the promotion finally went out for this event. This should have been a little caveat at the bottom of it. Speakers may appear differently than the advertising. I don't know who that gentleman is, but he looks a lot more fun than me, and I guess it's probably the reason why you're all here today, and you were disappointed when I stood up. So yeah, we're all in this business. We've been to a lot of conferences. We've probably read, I don't know how many books. I've probably read, 300-400 marketing books. And my observation is it became the law of diminishing returns. They all started to sound the same. There was the same sort of theories and all that in it. You'd go out to events, and it was kind of interesting. You'd hear about the same brands over and over again. You know what? I'm going to fly with this. It's okay. Perfect. Thank you for that. Great brands, obviously, great stories, but I would literally attend conferences, and one speaker would almost tell the same story, as the previous speaker, all about these same superlative brands. And it was funny, I thought I had a book in me, and interestingly enough, I just saw a stat that 86% of American business people feel they have a book in them, but never get the chance to write it for different reasons. I finally got around to it, and the catalyst for it, interestingly enough, was a summer market. So I do live in Mont-Tremblant, Quebec, and every Saturday on a transformed civic parking lot, a bunch of stalls go up, 30 or 40 stalls. And I walked there with my wife begrudgingly one day. I didn't want to be spending my Saturday there. But I was sort of enthralled by what I saw. First off, you got all five senses engaged. Obviously, the smells of product, the sound of bartering, the appearance of these booths. And these are people, who are pouring their heart and soul into what they did, which is something, when we get into big corporations, we don't see much of. These are people who are entrepreneurs who had unbelievable packaged, jams and marmalades, incredible product, lattice pies, the whole thing. And I witnessed marketing at its earliest roots, because a market like that would be recognizable 300 years ago in China. It's the same sort of system where you go up and you barter. I saw 2-for-1s being offered. Come back next week and I'll give you a deal. And that was really interesting for me to see. And then coincidentally, I saw an episode of Mad Men, and I'm sure a few of us have seen that, or at least we're familiar with it. And it wasn't even a scene with the agency or with Don Draper. Betty Draper, his wife, was putting on a dinner party. And someone said, "Wow, Betty, how did you do this?" And she said, "Well, my housekeeper did the marketing." And I thought that was so interesting. Did the marketing. She went and shopped for the ingredients, and see how we've used the term marketing through the years. Did the marketing, the shopping and buying. So it was really here that was the impetus for the book. And this is not to sell. I'm basically giving the book away in this hour, so believe me, this isn't a strong arm sales pitch about the book. I'm giving you pretty much all the content in it. And I don't know, if you're like me, I don't like a how-to. I don't like prescriptive. Some sort of linear checklist, and I battled with my publisher about, even putting that subtitle in. But there are 7 principles that I'll lead you through, and I think of it more as a game of Jenga, that all of these have to be in place. They're the building blocks of good marketing strategy, a good marketing campaign, and if you remove one, then the whole thing falls apart. And I just had about 3 or 4 discussions previous to getting up here, and probably for the past 6 months. And that's why I think it's so great to talk to this association, is that I believe marketing, we've gotten tripped up too much now thinking about tools, technology, and techniques. And without the fundamentals, all the shiny new toys in the world is not going to help you drive business. And so my book is really a return to fundamentals, and I've been surprised how much looking to the past you can succeed going forward. And you'll see in my examples that I'm going to give you in this presentation, more in the book, I go to the obscure, stuff you've probably never heard of before, but there's amazing lessons in it. And an amazing consistency and continuity through 300-400 years of marketing history. So the first principle I came across was position everything as a solution. How does whatever you're offering make people's lives easier, more enjoyable, more fulfilling, more beneficial? So I'd moved from Interbrand, where I was chief marketing officer, so that was all brand consulting, to DDB. And I wasn't doing client work at DDB. DDB was my client. I was the chief communications officer there. But of course, I began to hear how they approach business. And I always loved this one, the sort of mantra about You know, in the mattress business, you don't sell the mattress. You don't talk about coils and strength and, you know, the fabrics used. You sell the sleep, selling the benefit. And that's always stuck with me. So so this whole chapter is dedicated to that. I want to give you about 3 examples. Around the turn of last century, there was a problem that needed to be solved. Something needed to be a new solution, and it was, believe it or not, the good old Cracker Barrel. You know how we're starting to go back to buying in a little bit more bulk now in grocery stores where you can actually get things this way. Well, back around 1900, this was how you'd buy a cracker, and crackers were a staple of Americans' diet back then because they didn't have a wide menu. This kept fairly well, and it was filler for people who didn't have a lot of money. But the problem was the Cracker Barrel itself. Crackers were soggy, they broke, they could be vermin infested because, of course, we didn't have the regulation around safety and cleanliness back then. So a gentleman by the name of Adolphus Green, who actually bought up 17 biscuit companies to form the National Biscuit Company, which became Nabisco and is now part of, what is it again? I can't remember. Mondelez, thank you. Another sandwich for that gentleman right there. So he was actually a lawyer by background, but boy, he was a consummate marketer. He came up with this whole "You Need a Biscuit," a fun name, obviously being introduced, but also the box that we're familiar with for crackers now and cereals, and more importantly, what came in the box, which is that inner seal, you know, that plastic that we now break open. So not only did they innovate product, they innovated the packaging. And you can see how they laid this out. It was the first $1 million ad campaign. They spent $1 million to put this out. It was a teaser campaign we're all familiar with then, but it was the first teaser campaign in America. Signs went across the country saying, "You need a," and no one knew what that was about. And then 2 months later, "You know you need a." 2 months later, "You know you need a biscuit." And it finally came out, and he solved the problem of the Cracker Barrel. And look at the statistics. After its first year, 10 million packages every month, more than 20 times combined of the whole category. So yes, product innovation was a huge driver on that, but how he packaged that product innovation and got it out. He didn't sell the mattress, he sold the sleep, in other words. Side note, there's whole little foundations and societies that are into the preservation of these signs that are all across America where they spent that $1 million. And once in a while, you know, another building will come down and reveal one where it's been, you know, through the middle part of last century had been hidden. So it's quite interesting. Another neat solution came from this guy who deserves a movie. Actually, there's so many characters in my book, real figures, that deserve a movie like Ray Kroc, but this is King Camp Gillette, and of course we know him, know his last name very well. This is the patent on the original razor, and for about 50 years the design really didn't change, which was quite something. But like many entrepreneurs, actually King Camp failed out of the gate. In his first year, he sold just 51 razors and 168 blades. And partly because he was doing a little irreverent, a little tongue-in-cheek advertising. You can see what he's getting at here. So easy, a baby can do it, smooth as a baby's bottom. There's inferences in this advertisement as to how easy it could be. Because back then, what did guys have to do in the morning? They had to sharpen that. They had to, you know, sharpen their blade. It took time out of their day. And also, guys died nicking themselves because of, you know, poor hygiene and things back then. So he knew what he had to do, and he went and returned with his little marketing folks. Instead of focusing on the attributes, you know, what you offer, and even just the functional benefits, he took it farther up. What does this thing do for you? What is this solution, this thing I patented? What does it actually do for you? How can it appeal to someone? So he actually said, yes, it's still a time saver. It's hygienic. You shouldn't die from it. But more importantly, it's a path to success. Gentlemen, if you shave with a Gillette razor, you're going to win that job. You're going to get that promotion, and you're going to get a date. I make the last part up, but who knows? It was a path to success, and exponentially sales just rocketed, as you can see. As I say, he should deserve a movie. He died around 1930 in a robe in a facility, crying about building a utopian city. Just an amazing character, as I came across in my book. Tons of those characters. So once again, he had a razor that did the job, but that razor could gain you success in life. So that was the difference in how he positioned it. And it's funny, all of these are really relatable as stories, and that's my second principle. Tell stories. We are hardwired for stories. You're all meeting perhaps new people here today, and when someone says, what do you do, or where are you from, you begin actually phrasing it in the form of a story. Now, this weekend, you may be at a cocktail party. The same thing is going to happen. And that's because we think in metaphors and we share through stories. That's this old proverb, tell me facts, I'll learn, truth, I'll believe, but tell me a story, and it's going to sit there forever. Third example around the turn of last century, and believe me, I will bring it up to this century. This is a great entrepreneurial story. This is Edna Murphy, probably an older picture, or a picture taken later in her life, but when she started out, she was 16, quite the entrepreneur. And she actually totally invented, or helped invent, the antiperspirant deodorant category. Her father was a surgeon, and he had invented a liquid that kept his hands free of perspiration during surgery. And she thought, oh my gosh, this could have other uses. So she came up with this company, named it herself, Odor No, which once again, a little tongue-in-cheek. But she sold it based on medicinal benefits. The story was sell it through a pharmacy. This is a medicinal thing. Actually, hygiene back then was horrible. People stunk. If we were to go back in a time machine, we would be offended by being in social circles. That's just the way it was. And she failed. She's actually the consummate startup story. She had borrowed $500 from her grandfather, gone out and got a facility, began manufacturing it, sending it to pharmacies, and it just wasn't selling. So she had to regroup and literally went back to her parents' basement like so many .com folks did and so many digital folks do today when they don't hit it right out of the gate. But the smartest thing she did was hire a man named Webb out of J. Walter Thompson. He would go on to lead J. Walter Thompson worldwide. He would be inducted into all the Hall of Fames, including the Advertising Hall of Fame. But this was like one of his first gigs. Prior to this, he'd been selling Bibles door to door. So this guy probably knew perseverance and probably knew how to literally stick his foot in the door. And the way Webb went at it, he said, it's not about medicinal benefits, and it's actually not to be sold to men. It's to be focused on women. And we're going to make this all about social faux pas, so that if you were not hygienic or sweet smelling, that was going to affect your life. So he actually came up with these ads in Ladies' Home Journal. They spent a ton of money. She raised some more cash to put this out. And he waxed lyrical in long-form ads. Actually, if you read the prose, it's incredible. It's like reading The Great Gatsby, truly. The tone of it is fun. It's like frank advice from a good friend about if you don't do this, ladies, you may not find a man, et cetera, et cetera. I know some of that thinking is dated, but that was the time back then. And sales, once again, like Gillette, went exponential. And then and this is one probably about 30 years later, you can still see they're going on the faux pas, social faux pas thing. Hasn't she ever heard of Odor No? And this was an adoption for the category that exists to this day of the central story. Men could be such awful gossips talking about how she's not hygienic. And then this terrible reference to armhole odor, which is pretty direct. And it was incredible. If you look through the history now of deodorants, which is like a $34 billion category, every company, every product touches on the social faux pas. So he flipped it on its head, he got into good storytelling, and away it went. Now I'm going to take us up to this century, and I'm going to show a little video without much background, and we'll just discuss it after, and hopefully the sound will work and everything will work. So that's about 2012, and that's a company obviously called Mailbox, and that was a form of storytelling there. You had just a quick minute video. I was discussing prior with someone how important video is these days. Mailbox was a startup, came out with that nice little video that tells the story of organizing one's day, how easy it is to organize one's day. We're now so used to this technology being embedded in our smartphones, we forget that at that time, just different apps were being added, and we were looking to apps to organize our lives. But over a bouncy tune, that woman organizes both her professional and social calendar and still has time to go for a hike. The point of that, as a bit of updated storytelling, is that Dropbox liked that so much, they bought Mailbox for $100 million with no customers and no revenue, and story goes, it was on the strength of that video. So we've seen two principles so far: position as a solution, which they did, and tell a good story. So they took that storytelling in a different direction. Funny enough, you can be ubiquitous and extremely well-known and tell a great story, and it's still not going to move sales. I think we all remember the Taco Bell dog, hit in the 90s for 3 to 5 years, but believe it or not, same-store sales at Taco Bell declined probably 9% year after year. So they fired the CMO, they fired the ad agency, brought in another person from Burger King. They probably sold more plush toys of that dog than they did actual food products during that time. But everyone knew about it. It was, pop culture. It was in The Simpsons. It was everywhere, this Taco Bell dog. The same goes true with this classic ad from my alma mater, DDB. And we'll see if you remember it, and we'll just give it a couple of quick words after.
Sometimes you eat more than you should, and when it's spicy besides, Mama Mia, do you need Alka-Seltzer? Alka-Seltzer can help unstuff you, relieve the acid indigestion, and help make you your old self again.
Mamma Mia, that's a spicy meatball! Okay, that's great, George.
So, a very ubiquitous ad. Everyone knew it. It was great. Storytelling within storytelling, a commercial within a commercial. That line is also extremely well known in pop culture. The problem with it was, on the front of the table sat that pizza sauce for like 58 seconds of the 60-second ad, and Alka-Seltzer was this 2-second mention at the end. So Alka-Seltzer did not sell, but believe it or not, pizza sauce flew off the shelves. And won all the awards in the world, but did not move product, even though it was neat storytelling. We're an intimate crowd, so if you want to step up for another sandwich, please do. Third principle, leverage emotion because it compels. You could probably see where I'm going with this. Good emotion injected into a story is going to help propel it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a company that we're all familiar with, De Beers. Hugely successful, basically invented the diamond engagement ring, and I'll explain that in a second. First off, this has also been voted the top tagline of last century by Ad Age magazine. And a side story, a junior copywriter within De Beers actually came up with it, Frances Garrity, and from 1947 to about 1970, she was rewarded by writing every ad they put out over that time frame. Really interesting. But what we're going to talk about is the background to that. De Beers came to America in 1938. Depression was still kind of going on. They're on the cusp of World War II. It's tons of austerity. Up until that point, only 10% of women's engagement rings possessed a diamond. Women actually saw it as frivolous. They would rather have something practical like a washing machine or a car. And in the space of a few years, they went from 1939 to 23 million in sales to 1979, over $2 billion in sales. And that's because they took emotion and they made love synonymous with the diamond engagement ring, the physical symbol of love and commitment. And the agency, NWA at the time, said sentiment is so essential to you. It's your product. It's that emotional connection. For the diamond is one competitive advantage that no one else can claim or dispute. And you'll see their ads, even though they definitely keep their tagline throughout, you also see it's this embodiment of love. They basically created the category much like Odor Ono did. But what's funny now is millennials aren't buying diamond rings. They got a problem. So the whole industry has a problem. And that problem is they like to spend money on experiences over physical objects. So this is a big challenge. This isn't from De Beers. This is actually from the Diamond Producers Association. So they've come up with their own tag, real is rare, real is a diamond. The little text up here, Elaine and Travis have been together for 5 years. Her diamond is more than 2 billion years old, signifying that connection. They're still sort of drafting off De Beers, a diamond is forever, and they're playing up with social media to see where that will go, but interesting development for them in that category. Also in this chapter, I talk about Dove Real Beauty campaign, which 7, 8 years ago was the talk of the advertising industry. How could Unilever, a company that has been basically putting out products to cover women up, we're now telling them to show their true selves, so very interesting. I've always had a problem with a lot of the World Wildlife stuff. They shame us, make us feel bad, rather than celebrating the victories that they've had and communicating the changes they've made to protecting the environment. And then if you're in the US or you watch US television, every insurance company has kind of a mascot. You've got the duck, you've got the professor, you've got mayhem, and I explain why. They're actually clever misdirections. The whole insurance industry used to communicate on fear. Now they're doing it a bit on humor and wanting you to think a different way about buying insurance and covering yourself. The next principle is building relationships one at a time. We're in this mass world now. We're thinking about large segmentation. We're hoping that broadcast will still win in some regard, but it's really important that you think about each customer as a proper name, not a number or a segment. And one company that's kind of done that, interestingly, well over the years is After Eight Mints. Anyone familiar with After Eight Mints? Yeah. Been around since 1960. They came out from Roundtree. My parents would put them out at dinner parties after 8, growing up in the 70s. I hated them as a kid. They were like the wrong taste. Put out a box of turtles, those things were gone to my room. But After 8 were too minty and not good for me, so they did appeal to seniors, older people. My parents would hate that one. So After 8, it was a bit of advice given to the Brits. So it came out first in the UK. What had the UK experienced up until that point? Well, World War II had devastated them economically, so they had 15 years of austerity measures, and they were just starting to come out of it around 1960. So they hadn't entertained in well over a decade. People were not throwing dinner parties. They couldn't afford it. You could maybe go to the pub and have a pint. That was about it. But now they had some cash, so After 8 Mints came out. Once again, the box, the name, truly says it all. They were precious because each one came in their little pouch, right, that people could select. And so it was neat to watch the evolution of their advertising from 1960 all the way up to present day. This is an example of the early one. Like, this woman's glamorous in the early 60s. This is not what you would expect from 1950s London or the UK. There was this elite sophistication and training on how to entertain and when to lay this out and when to do it properly. And after a while, that sort of failed on them. Sales slid. So they went to irreverent inclusivity about, getting other people involved in buying it for different reasons, and finally to self-deprecation. But the biggest thing they did from a strategy point of view is they painted themselves into two corners. One is they said, you only have to put this out after 8, right? So they're actually losing sales through the rest of the day. So they began doing campaigns about put it out for high tea, put it out for lunch, and that helped. And then they had a bigger problem. Only the host was to put it out, host and hostess. But then they advertised, well, if you're a guest, bring a box as well. And that quadrupled sales. So it was very interesting to watch. And from generation to generation, they've always focused on the individual. This is some of their more recent stuff. If you want a great dinner party, don't cut corners. The moment a good dinner party becomes a great one, still appealing to their heritage, but being a little more hip. And then this tagline that they're experimenting with, no one leaves after 8. The party's going to keep on rolling. So they're trying to be a little cooler as they go ahead. But sales have never slid. It's just been strong, strong, strong. And here we are probably 2 to 3 generations later. So we know you can only build a relationship with trust. I'm a big fan of the Nielsen study that comes out every 3 to 4 years. It's the trust study. And advertising keeps going down the list as something that people trust. Peers and friends and family are basically the number one thing that goes up. There's also huge distrust in standing institutions, too. So I tell the story of where Ford, I think they're going to not be the motor company anymore. They're going to be the mobility company. They're doing really neat things about ride sharing, about almost the decrease in the use of automobiles. So they're doing an interesting left hook in their strategy, and that will gain them trust with the younger generation. This company fell into problems when the CEO made some homophobic remarks, but recovered beautifully. You know, we're fallible. Companies are fallible. Brands are fallible. We make mistakes. If we apologize earnestly, we can move on. And then this is our next and last video, and we'll discuss it after it plays. So interesting positioning from them to go for a moderation message, and one where, of course, men are coming off poorly in that. And funny thing is about advertising, you think it's about one thing and it's about another. The reason what they're doing that is actually they want to attract female drinkers to Heineken. In the craft brewing market now, women are the biggest drinkers of craft brewing. So this is Heineken, a big brand, trying to combat that, but doing it with an interesting message around moderation and slagging men at the same time. So highly successful for them. And then once you have those one-on-one relationships, it's important to form community. There's a stat or two I want to get to, I don't want to miss. You know, we're all tribal by nature. We find like-minded groups and we join them. And it was interesting through my research to see that there's, you know, some brands. All 3 of these actually run at Mont Tremblant. Wanderlust is the yoga event, Spartan, those muddy races, and of course Ironman. Absolutely incredible to see people push themselves to the limit. But these are organizations that are basically built as a community to begin with, which is cool. Then you have what Howard Schultz once referred to Starbucks as the third place, right, after work and home. And gyms used to be that. Bars used to be that as well. Now, so we have different third places. And then you have those brands that actually form communities based on their positioning, based on their offer. Red Bull has got a passionate following from the youth, partly because of videos and showing these folks doing extreme stuff. GoPro's similar, but you actually become your own crazy person by strapping, you know, a camera on your helmet. And then finally, Harley Davidson, for 50 years, has been that rebel, but, you know, middle-aged rebel stuff. So different communities going on. I'm going to ask a question of the group. What do you think of when you hear the word Tupperware? Any adjectives come to mind? Yeah. Burp. The burp seal. That was it. Yeah, that was an innovation. Yeah. Anything? You know, they used to demonstrate it in home by putting paint in it and throwing it against the wall in someone's living room after they burped it. Yes. Anyone else? Tupperware. What do you think of? Pyramid selling. It's actually called party planning, but yeah, we'll put a nicer spin on it. And it's totally funny. I had an experience with this. My stepdaughter did Stella and Dot, which is a jewelry company, and she somehow got contacted through them by Facebook. Got excited. She was going to invite her peers over to our home. My wife ended up having to take everything over and invite, of course, her network of friends, because they're the ones who had cash. It wasn't going to be high school girls. And I actually gave myself a job, the official pourer of wine to lubricate sales. And that actually, because I wanted to see this thing in action, but you're absolutely right. It gives that notion of a pyramid scheme. But there's a lot of things going on here. Here, of course, they're only serving tea. I had the vino going. You feel peer pressure. You're in someone else's living room. They've leveraged their social network to get people in there. And you think someone's going to leave without making a purchase? Oh my gosh! In suburbia, that would be death in social circles. So there is this pressure. And once again, someone else who deserves a movie, and actually there is talk of Sandra Bullock playing her, is Brownie Wise. Came over from Stanley Products, where she had learned this method because they were using it, and helped Mr. Tupper, Earl Tupper, save his business. He was trying to sell through stores, even at a flagship store on Fifth Avenue in New York, like go to Tupperware, Fifth Avenue, New York. Didn't make sense. She started this, became the CEO, first woman ever on Business Week, absolutely amazing. And we discount Tupperware. You know, we kind of laugh about it when I ask the question. Well, 90% of U.S. homes, all U.S. homes have one piece of Tupperware. Talk about penetration. Every 2.5 seconds, there is a Tupperware party somewhere in the world. Because they're in 90-plus countries. There's 2.7 million ambassadors, those who go out to flog their neighborhood and get people to host. And they're doing $2.5 billion in sales. And I've heard tell, I haven't got one, but they say if you want to get a good yoga, gym, workout water bottle, get a Tupperware bottle. They're supposedly the best, last and all that. And you can see they're not just sticking to the traditional party. They're coming up with themes. They're doing all this. Their array of products is a lot different. So I'm looking forward to that movie if it ever comes out. We've all heard this through the years, customer experience. I'm actually helping a former client write, they're a loyalty company, write a book on experience, and we're all defining this in different ways now. What is the customer experience, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, we always used to think about transactions and broadcast, and now it's really highly personal experiences and hopefully being targeted. And we used to think in our research that people valued possessions over experiences, and that's changing a lot. Marketers thought that possessions really identified people. People are talking more about what they do now versus what they wear and what they drive. That will always be a part of it because that's branding, but there is a shift. So marketing must now focus on the experience of the item or service, not the item or service itself. Funny bit of research. This is actually where my book started. This is a 17th century London coffee house. The population of London was 500,000 at the time. They had 500 coffee houses. And that's because they didn't have booze, and also they had poor hygiene. I keep going back to the hygiene. Their drinking water was horrible, so they needed to boil it. They needed to use it in a different way, so that's why coffee houses were extremely popular. And long before Starbucks and Chapters or Starbucks and other bookstores co-branded, believe it or not, there were many of these. How they differentiated themselves was not only did they sell coffee, they'd sell securities, they'd sell maritime insurance, they'd sell art, they'd sell maps, they'd sell books. So about 3 centuries before bookstores got together with Starbucks, they were already doing this. And I love it. There was one called the Folly of the Thames. It was a floating coffee house that would turn into a bar later and go nuts. And my favorite was Luntz. It was a combo coffee house and barbershop, which I still think is a great idea today. Could totally work. So they were really creating a neat experience inside. Further, stuff was going on. This was actually advancing London's thinking. The Wealth of Nations, he wrote it in a coffee shop, and probably took him a long time, because I know it took me a long time to read in university. They called them penny universities because they put out publications, and because they didn't want to give away the periodicals, they charged a penny for admission. And then, believe it or not, they'd have these incredible discussions and debates about different things in the world. My favorite part of the London experience of a coffee shop 300 years ago is they'd have actors come in and act out the ads. So you had broadcast television, radio going on inside a coffee shop far before we came up with the technology. This is interesting. What do you think of when you hear the word Heinz? Ketchup. It's amazing how instantly it goes to it. And he actually really nurtured that along. He wanted to have that same impact with ketchup that he did with all of his other products. He was a showman, a stickler for detail. This is actually the Heinz Pier at Atlantic City. It ran for 47 years, basically through mid-last century. It was a precursor to, the world of Coke, Busch Gardens, Hershey, all the ones that we see today. Even Disney to that regard. He created almost a theme park. So it was their pavilion. Inside, you could go taste test. You could grill his employees on, what works, what didn't. You could get samples. Believe it or not, over the course of that 47 years, they only ran it in the summer, 50 million people walked through this place. And every one of them left with a little Heinz pickle pin. So these are now collector's items on eBay, but absolutely incredible. He was also ahead of us. He was like the Google. He had a campus and treated his employees really well. They had spas, classes, libraries, you name it. Not beanbag chairs and games, but that sort of thing. He was really, really a promoter. And because you said ketchup, I knew to insert this slide. Believe it or not, 650 million bottles of ketchup are sold every year, about 80% of them now in plastic. But a lot of people still just love the glass. There's something about the texture of the glass, the hygienic nature, nostalgia. But they will reject the batch of ketchup if it doesn't flow at exactly 0.28 miles per hour out of the bottle. We all remember that anticipation ad from the 70s. And a little known thing too, if you want to get it moving faster, you tap that Heinz 57 on the neck of the bottle. None of us knew that growing up. We just sat there in frustration and anger trying to get the stuff out. But if you tap the neck of the bottle, it'll come faster. This is a scary stat. They actually make 11 billion single-serve packets a year. So lots of environmentalists are unhappy about that. You can almost imagine the landfill, of it. But this is the new one. We're all used to that little rectangular one that we would get, and it came out and there was just a tiny bit of ketchup. Now, 3 times the amount of ketchup comes out, and of course they did something smart by taking the iconic bottle shape and putting it there and having that association with the original bottle. And it was so fun. I read a Wall Street Journal article on this. They spent 3 years researching and designing this new single packet. And they actually created a room, and they had the guys in the white lab coats and paper behind looking at it. And they created a drive-through inside. They actually had a van that would come in, and they had different real families come in, order, and then they would see how they would work the packets and see how they shook the van to see how it would work. And I just think it's so funny the amount of detail we go to. This one hit, I'm a Manitoban by background. I don't know, did anyone see this earlier this year? So this is obviously a blend of mayonnaise and ketchup. They put it out this year in Canada. In Manitoba, the predominant First Nations group is the Cree. And the Cree kind of said, oops, because this means shithead in their language. No joke. They didn't change the name, but that is a true story. Also in this chapter, I talk about Singer and how they got that out there. Ladro, my mother loved that stuff. It creeped me out, but I tell the story of Ladro. And Topshop, who, when I wrote the book, just got published earlier this year, was on its top of its game, and we know how quickly businesses can fade. They're in a lot of trouble now. But they democratized the fashion show. The runways that take place became so insular, only 500 people could be invited, and through technology, they invited people in. And we've got about 15 minutes. I want to take questions, so we're getting there. We all know this one too. It has to be authentic. And I talk in this chapter not about being honest and transparent. To me, those are givens. I talk about different things when it comes to transparency and honesty, because advertising, of course, has just been slammed historically about either being dishonest or disingenuous or spamming us. And interesting enough, I spoke to the CMO at KFC. What I liked about what he said in the interview, the quote was perfect, it's more difficult to be something you're not. And so KFC has really embraced itself and being these things. These are the words he gave me, that it's honest, boldly unapologetic, a little edgy. We avoid trying to be these things. I'd love to debate him on this because they're doing so many gimmicky things. You could buy chicken-smelling deodorant and chicken-smelling suntan lotion from them now. So that, to me, is a little bit gimmicky. But I love that notion. It's more difficult to be something you're not. And my definition of authenticity goes a little bit further. It's also being open as a business. Two of these big little ideas came from someone on the front lines of these businesses. This notion of writing a customer's name on a cup came out of a Starbucks business. It didn't come out of headquarters to start doing that. And if you listen to your employees, you're going to be a more authentic, transparent, and ultimately honest business. The $5 footlong from Subway came out of a franchisee in Florida. He just had, Tuesday was a real slow day. You know, how am I going to get people in the door? I'm going to offer, you know, my fairly cheaper sandwiches for $5. It doesn't exist across their whole menu. And then what happens? Subway corporate adopts it and rolls it out to all franchisees. So that's another way to be honest, transparent in the business. Pabst Blue Ribbon, I tell the story of how they don't actually market. So that's an intriguing one. They stay away from it based on who their target audience is. And of course, we know the failure of Google Glass, but why did it fail? And I don't like beating up on Lululemon, but they did have the sheer pants controversy and why they had a chance to bounce back from that really well and didn't do it. So wrapping up, I'm just going to put all of them up there. So to sum, position everything as a solution. How does it make someone's lives easier, more enjoyable, more rewarding, just that much better? Does it save them time? Does it give them prestige? Does it make them feel cool? What's the story behind it? We're losing storytelling. I talked about this with a number of folks before the talk. Good storytelling's in short supply. Technology is in oversupply. Inject that story with emotion, and that should help start the relationship. Then you can form communities, deliver that great experience, and make sure you're doing it right all the time. So I'll end off there. We've got minutes for questions, and I demand at least 3 from this intellectual-looking group. Yes?
How do you explain Volkswagen? That's a pretty major faux pas.
Yep.
And while they did apologize, I don't think sincerely, and yet their sales hasn't seemed to have suffered.
Well, it was interesting because they were not in every country, but they were a DDB client, and that happened at the time. Predominantly, we had them in Western Europe, and I thought they were toast. I did. I didn't voice it at that time, obviously, but I thought they were toast. But sometimes there's things that are just too big to fail. I was surprised they got let off, even though they've been stung financially. I'm surprised the brand didn't take a bigger hit, and I really can't explain it, except that once again we're all regionalized. We all, they do sales all around the world. The story carried big in North America. It got protected in Europe because their whole supply chain is woven with Europe, so every country benefits through them existing. And then probably in South America and Asia, it just wasn't that big a story. Yes?
You talk about telling stories and leveraging emotions, and that takes time to do, but in advertising these days, we are crunched for time, it seems. So how do you balance being able to do that with still being able to condense it into shorter lengths?
So I like looking from the top down. There's, unless it's a startup, there's probably already an established brand story and positioning. And if you have to move to campaigns that are on 9, 6, 3 months, or 1 day basis, you should still be drawing from that brand story all the time. And companies don't do that, which is ridiculous because I know from Interbrand they invest in the brand story, but then they run off and do campaigns that are not tied in theme or thesis, and it drives me nuts because their performance is based on next day sales or next month's sales. So I've seen in the last 10 years, as I put at the beginning of this, you can have all the tech in the world you want. If you don't have these 7 fundamentals, you're just churning. I don't think you're grabbing market share. You might have a win one campaign against your competitor, but not the next. There's got to be that consistency in the brand. That's one of the tenets that was always struck upon me when I entered Interbrand. I'd been a general management consultant at Price Waterhouse and Deloitte before, and then I went and had this amazing training at Interbrand, and it was really focus on the positioning, focus on the story. and all can flow from that, and they can flow quicker, right? Because you've got that foundation, you've got that, or umbrella if you want to look at it that way, that your messaging can follow regardless of the shortness that you have to get it out. Interestingly enough, Interbrand's getting completely bashed this week. They launched their best global brands. I used to run that study, and I'm still enamored of them. They were my best employer. I got an MBA every 6 months from them. But they came out with this new thing called iconic moves, and they've said positioning is dead. It's all about iconic moves, and people are really, yeah, I have the same expression. People who are in the know have been bashing them, and I have to laugh because iconic moves is a positioning. They're basically, mocking themselves, which is dumb. Anyway, just an aside. There's an article in Marketing Week about it that's fascinating. Yes.
The KFC example you gave, and I do work in social media. I think about Wendy's and their start. I'm just wondering what your thoughts or comments are on when KFC does this gimmicky thing, but it's authentic to them. When other brands either try to mimic the coffee, it's not authentic anymore. And so, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, they're all gravitating to the same spot. Have you noticed that? It's like I put up the insurance companies out of the U.S. They're battling for 1 or 2% market share changes, not gains, because they're often losses for them. And I feel that's happening in fast food. What I find interesting is they're all looking like McDonald's Happy Meal. When McDonald's would give out a toy, and then got lambasted for that because that was swaying parents and kids to buy bad food because a toy came with it. Now they're offering all these other gimmicks. You don't hear the fast food companies talking about anymore is their food. And that's what's striking me. And they're introducing new sandwiches, new things all the time. Tim Hortons got slammed this week in the National Post about losing its way, bad performance. Part of that is because they've had a fight with franchisees. Part of it is because the foreign owners haven't really known the business. But all of these lead me back to what is your positioning and how does it differentiate? And to your point, Burger King's tried to go to that KFC space, Popeyes in the U.S., all of them have gravitated to being fun and not talk about food. Curious. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Please.
Because you've seen much, been on many boards, etc. How do you get over that notion now, where most HR people, most senior people are saying, "Listen, I need a person that thinks digital first. Give me someone like that." And then, yes, your brand hits your balance sheet every day. You could argue, well, digital doesn't hit your balance sheet every day, but on the converse of that, yeah, digital does hit your balance sheet every day.
Yeah.
So how do you get over that? How do you explain to people that digital's, it's important, maybe it's a tactic, it's not a strategy, et cetera? You've heard this.
Yep.
What's your comment on that?
Well, this is where I think we have a generational thing. So I think my definition of strategy is different than someone in the digital or social media department who's 30. So where I think they're doing tactics, they think they're doing strategy. And that's where part of the disconnect comes from. But I ask my clients 3 questions up front. And by God, they're not earth-shattering by any stretch, so don't be looking for a nirvana here. But, what do you have that you think is different? And 9 times out of 10, what they think they have is not really what it is, and that's why they need an outside consultant. Second is, who wants or needs it? And those are 2 different questions, because wants and needs are different, though they're the fundamentals of marketing. And that gets their head thinking. The last question, getting to yours, Peter, is, then how do those people like to be engaged? If you've identified those 2 audiences in a broad front, how do they like to be engaged? That's the marketing mix answer you get to. Well, they like to be on social media, but we're starting the conversation with assuming who we know, or assuming our audiences, and assuming the message we want to get to them, much to your question about strategy and storytelling. So we're starting, I think, on the ass end and getting into tactics and running around with busy work and getting a lot of statistics. And, we've heard this phrase, big data, the last 10 years, and all, empirical measurement. Well, I've worked with companies for 25, 30 years. They have so much data, they don't know how to do it, what to do with it. So it's crazy to start from that end. To me, I must be sounding stodgy in my older age, but I really think it's about these things flowing first, and that'll get you to, this gets you to audience, this gets you to the tactics you need to do. But fundamentally, I think we do have a little age difference. I don't like the millennial versus the world stuff that's been written about, but I think we both, the younger folks and myself, have a different orientation to the word strategy and tactics. Yeah.
On your, from relationships form community, how do you, when you advise clients, how do you get them away from the campaign mindset? Because campaigns don't form communities. Where they form them for a short time, but then they move on, they move the budget to another campaign or to something else, and they allow the community that they formed, even if it was temporary, to die.
It's the I have them separate out, if they don't do it already, from their communications or marketing spend, delineate out a loyalty spend, because that's important. We're also happy to get that new client. We've all heard the statistics, new versus old. But if they can actually break down their overall marketing spend and have a loyalty column, that keeps focus on building that community. And then the next thing is, give it to the community. It's almost like political activism, grassroots stuff. Give them some tools and get the hell out of the way and see how the community reacts to the brand. I rewrote Beaver Tails, the sugary treats brand story this summer. I'd met the fellow at the C2 conference, the CEO, and so we did a little project this summer. And he said, I'm not even doing market research anymore. We're just reading every piece of social media feedback we get. And we're letting the community form, and we're letting the community inform us. And you know, they're sending Beaver Tails trucks to weddings now. They would never thought to go to a wedding. It's the dessert treat at midnight, you know, for the hammered guests. And because the CEO is quite fun in saying half our menu is for hangovers. So interestingly enough, they listened to their audience and it went that way. So I'm gonna hold it there if that's okay, because we have 3 minutes to switch over, and then I get to eat a sandwich. So that's great. Thank you so much for coming out.